Greetings, everyone. Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes? Good, all right, excellent. Welcome to our session. My name is Kelly Durkin Ruth, and I'm the Engineering Librarian at the United States Naval Academy. I'm here with Rauh from Syracuse University and Lindsay Cronk from the University of Rochester, and they will introduce themselves shortly. So we're talking today about collection development policies and how our libraries have pursued creating and updating this important documentation. I'll be talking about lessons learned from our recent first stab at revising our collections policy and how we can figuratively keep ourselves afloat. So expectations played a big part in our process, and I thought this image of a rusty boat called Expectations was a particularly apt image. So as a sign of the times, the impetus for this talk came from Twitter. In February, after a really frustrating collections meeting I was in, I sent this tweet into the ether about what was in various collection development policies, and I got two great responses. One from Lindsay saying her library had moved away from policy statements to statements of values and practices. And Annie sent another wonderful response saying basically the same, that her library had moved toward a set of principles and a values document for licensing. And their work has led me to encourage my colleagues to rethink our approach, and I hope they inspire you as much as they have inspired me. So the question my library dealt with was, how do we modernize this document to reflect our values and mission while being honest about the reality of our work and the relationships we have with our university community? And although we may think that a collections policy's home is in acquisitions and technical services, the implications breach the walls of the library into the community at large. But to start our story about keeping ourselves afloat, we have to go back in time to the mid-'80s. So Stranger Things Season 2 was set in October of 1984, and so is our collection development policy. This document is older than I am, and it's available online for public consumption. You can go ahead and read it. And it's interesting to reflect on where we were 30 plus years ago. The purpose of this document is actually quite clear, and the scope is quite clear. This was supposed to be reviewed every year. That obviously did not happen. It's also really interesting to see how we talked about money over this time period. These sections I have up here say that fiscal considerations are important yet secondary to academic needs. And if we need to build out part of our collection significantly, for example, to support a new major, then we would need to have our funds increased accordingly and not cannibalized from other parts of the library budget. This top section says that we are collecting back files on microform. We are not actively doing that now. Don't worry. And the bottom section says that that funding has an effect on how many things we subscribe to, and that canceling serials is primarily based on budget constraints. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. So these excerpts give us an idea of what we're working with. So we have some references to formats that we're not actively collecting. There's a fleeting mention of databases, but this does not reflect our current collecting practices. And according to this document, it is the faculty that have a primary role in selecting and deselecting materials. The document also situates most of the collection decision-making power with a position that doesn't exist anymore. So it is really just time to update this thing. But truthfully, this policy has some strong bones, and the soul of what we do is still there. It states clearly what levels of support we can provide students, faculty, and military officers. A lot has changed over the past 30 years, but our core mission remains the same. We're still an undergraduate institution. We are still a teaching university, and we still have some specific specialty areas like naval history and my favorite department, naval architecture. So in January of 2019, a new document emerged, and this is where our rusty boat of expectations come into play. It is safe to say that the reference and instruction selectors, we are one and the same, anticipated a revision of the 1984 document, and what we got was a brand new document. So it was written by one author, without input from liaisons, faculty, students, anyone else. And I think the selector group, the liaison group, was really caught off guard to see such a drastic change because of the implications that would have on our work. So as an aside, yesterday there was an excellent session about communication between acquisitions and subject specialists, and in the discussion, a key part of that communication between departments is really trust and knowing the work of the other. This was not that. This was not that. This was a reactive process, and I have come to know my colleagues well enough to realize that this taking a stab at a document and then sending it out for review doesn't work. It really doesn't work for us. We succeed when we can collaborate across departments from the ground up. And I found it's especially tricky to use this draft feedback format when the author is in a position of power or authority, because it's hard to trust if that feedback will be heard. So we had questions. We had so many questions, and I felt really bad for the author of this document because they had spent so much time working on it, and now you have the entire reference department being like, what are you doing? What are you doing? So we were in this very reactionary mode. So those were some process issues. We also had some content issues. It wasn't clear for whom the document was written. Was it meant for the dean? Was it meant for selectors? Was it meant for acquisitions? And the purpose also wasn't very clear. Was it meant to be informational or instructional? Our 1984 document didn't reflect our current practices, and this one didn't either. It referred to jobs that hadn't been created yet. It shifted our purchasing priorities for monographs from 2 e-publications across disciplines, so our humanities librarians were not happy about that. And it made us wonder, whose reality were we talking about? Was it the selector's reality? Whose was it? So we had confusion about intent, whose reality, and then the biggest issue appeared to be a shift in values and priorities compared to that 1984 document. And we as liaisons were not prepared for this. So now we have to ask the question, whose values, and then what implications might those changes have for relationships within our university community? And that is the value that we as selectors and liaisons bring to this exercise, because it is our job to know our departments and know the faculty and know their work and how this change may impact others down the line. So for example, if in our revised document we center student learning and research and faculty teaching, are we intentionally downplaying our support for faculty research and support of faculty in their quest for tenure? This 1984 document said specifically, this is how we're going to support faculty in their research, as the budget allows. So what meaning might that omission have in a very detailed document, which this was? Was it intentional? How well will something like that go over with a faculty that has faced subscription cuts year after year after year? This is a problem with very specific policies. You can try to think of everything, but something inevitably will be left out. According to the new draft, we would have collected everything at a study or instructional support level with no areas of deeper research collecting. We have very small pockets, like I said, of research level subject areas like naval science, military science. Are these no longer valuable to us? What thinking led to the change of flattening those support levels? And what impact would that have on our community and our reputation within it? And do we no longer see ourselves as having these areas of specialty? Another question that came up was, instead of stating levels of acquisitions by their function, like academic support or military professional development, the new document ranked them based on their role in the university, with students coming first and faculty in their teaching roles, then faculty in their research needs, and then the dreaded other category, which was staff and librarians. And this seemed really unfair and arbitrary. Not the librarians part, we can deal with the librarians part. But we have professional staff who run labs and do research in their own right. And student and faculty and staff research is so often intertwined, it's really hard to draw a bright line to say which is which. So are we saying we don't value their work and their contributions that are not a priority for us, and we're going to support them as such? And with a possible move toward most or all ebook purchases, as most with one seat available, how might that impact instruction for faculty and for librarians in the classroom? And what author voices may we miss out on if we restrict ourselves in this way? So there may be an argument that, oh, no one's going to read this document. It's a collection policy. No one reads it. But hear me out. What if they did? What if they did actually read it? What would they see and think and glean about us and our priorities? So we did not have a framework for asking these values-based questions, and we really needed one to be able to proceed in a constructive way. So although I am not leading this project, I do want to try and move us forward in a constructive manner, and I think some of these suggestions might get us there. As an aside, I'm currently reading Mary Gentile's Giving Voice to Values, which I found to be a really insightful book. One of the points she makes is that in situations where values may conflict, even if it turns out that your values are not the correct ones in the situation, it's really helpful to have that conversation for your organization. Giving voice in that context is asking well-framed, well-timed questions to promote reflection and critical thinking. And she also mentions one person in the book who stopped assuming that opinions or preferences exposed by superiors were orders and began interpreting them as invitations for discussion and exploration. So your mileage may vary on that, but that is going to be my approach for this. So I am currently on a Paul and Elder critical thinking framework kick. I've used that in other projects successfully, and I think it could benefit us in this situation. Briefly, their framework has 3 parts. I'm more interested in the first, the elements of thought or reasoning. There are 8 elements, and they can serve as good jumping off points for asking questions about how we're thinking about a thing. So we can ask, what is the purpose of a document? What problem are we trying to solve with this document? What point of view are we using? What information underlies our thinking? What concepts or approaches frame our thinking? What conclusions are we drawing? What are the implications and consequences of our document or our thinking? And because this has such far-reaching implications, I think this process, at least for us, has to be collaborative from the outset and might be able to bridge that gap between reality and ideals because we all bring valuable perspectives to the table. And what is just enough information to convey our priorities without getting dragged down by so much detail? This is where I think a model like Rochester and Syracuse can really help us with clear statements of vision and values. And let's be real, if we're gonna wait another 30 years to update this document, we gotta get it right now and we have to be flexible, right? We gotta know ourselves. So here is our timeline. Skipping the 1984 to 2018 part. In January of 2019, we had a new draft policy distributed. February and March, we had meetings with selectors, and I sent that tweet out, which got us to today. We had a draft policy rewrite underway. We were told about this in May of 2019, and now it's November, and there hasn't really been anything else at this point, which I think is okay, because I think we might have needed to press pause and just regroup to see what we needed to do going forward. We have a lot more work to do. So in closing, the conversations can be difficult, they can be delicate because it has an impact on work of faculty and students, but we have to assume that everyone from liaisons to acquisitions to management have everyone's best interest in mind and are coming from the right place. And even if we're coming from the right place, we haven't yet reached the place we need to be, but I know we can get there. Lindsay.
Awesome presentation, Kelly. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. It's all about how I took a new job and I inherited a bunch of weird old web pages that said a lot of really specific, but not entirely accurate things about our collections, and what I decided to do with them, which was mostly a team building exercise, right? But also the really important work that we have to do to clarify and build trust as teams, to build our capacity, to build our ability to actually do things, and perhaps most excitingly, to make some terrariums together. So if you know me, you may not, you'll know I really love creative facilitation. So sort of the meta of this is going to be that sometimes if you want to build a really powerful, impactful, meaningful document that people know inside and out, it's not just about the act of typing together in a Google Doc or doing a drafting process. It's about what makes the process memorable. A fact about terrariums that I did not know before I facilitated this workshop is that while they are living, the best way for them to live is with a little bit of benign neglect. They are supposed to be left alone. You build them to last, and then you don't mess around with them. The same thing could be said, right, of the sort of guiding principles that we want in place to guide our collections. Oh, and I'm Lindsay Cronk. I'm at the University of Rochester. It's in Rochester, New York. And I'm a loud internet person and a lifer in collections, basically. It's my second career, but I came that way via consortia into a series of positions, and I've just been very lucky, I think, to have the opportunity to take some of the risks that I'm going to describe to you today. So this is one of the pieces I inherited. You'll note that this is a very unattractive Drupal website, extremely text-based and extremely specific. It talks through what are called the guiding principles for collection development and management. It wasn't until later that I discovered that this was actually designed as a document to oversee a reference weeding project. So it is definitely not describing what it was meant to do, right? It's actually saying a guiding principle, to my mind, is actually a really powerful idea, right? And it's something that should be a rule. It should be, excuse me, you guys, this mic is driving me crazy. Let's try that. Can you all still hear me? That's much better. Okay, so guiding principles are rules that we write together, that we agree to abide by, that can direct much more specific documentation, right? Around workflows, around best practices, around how we do what we do. But this should center the why of what we do. This document didn't do that. It said things like, I'm gonna pick one. Where's the duplicates? So it literally said that we weren't going to keep duplicates, which is not a values-based argument at all, right? Like, it talks a lot about process, and talking about process is really good and important, but it's maybe not a thing that should live in a principles-based document, right? So I inherit these materials. What's cool about them is that they're all dated, so I know that they're from 2015. I'm not in a 30-year-old document situation, I'm just in a near document situation. The other thing I inherited was a weird libguide that got migrated into a website because we made the decision that libguides were for, you know, learning and not for internal process documents. And that thing was wild. That was like a lot to spelunk and get through, right? But I inherited these things and I realized what was missing when we talked about collections, which for those of us who do the work, we know that it's extremely collaborative, right? Extremely living and challenging to do and pull off because you have internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, specialized external audiences in the form of your vendors and consortial partners. You have internal people whose processes you need to respect who are doing publicly facing work, right? But you also have people that are behind the scenes that are doing wild technical processes that you can't fully communicate, and you shouldn't necessarily spend everyone's time trying to do it anyway. I did not like these documents, in case that is not clear. And so I took advantage of some relationships that I'd built in my local community and a trick that I actually learned at the University of Houston, which is that getting people off-site is sometimes the best way to get them out of their patterns of behavior and make them think in a different way. So this is the Rochester Brainery. It's a beautiful community learning space, bright, airy, spacious, everything that my stunning but, you know, 1930s library is not. Like, there's a lot of wood paneling. But this space allowed us that opportunity to be out of our own comfort zones and for people to really come together. I also brought in not just our outreach librarians, though they were really crucial to informing this process. I brought members of our metadata services team. I brought members of our acquisitions team. I tried to bring everyone to the table that I could. I brought our coordinator for document delivery and access services, right? Trying to make sure that when we were thinking about collections, we were really thinking about what are all the aspects of those services, right? And can we begin to capture those? Can we have principles that speak to all of us, right? Because that's going to be a very powerful tool for building and coalescing trust. Because to Kelly's point, trust is not a thing that comes easy, right? And particularly in some of our institutions where we have bigger staffs, that sense that I don't know what you're doing can turn to distrust like that. So the retreat itself, again, I parlayed, you know, for the space, and then I hooked up with a very kind lady who allowed me to buy all of the materials for the terrariums you saw, right? She let me do the supply purchasing, and then for a nominal fee, she taught us all about terrariums, which is how I learned, again, that you're not supposed to mess with them, which makes them a wonderful analogy for your guiding principles documents. So, in the course of that day, here's what we did. We defined for ourselves who the audience was for our guiding principles. It's mostly internal, right? Mostly it's about stating for ourselves what we do, the reason we do it. And then we went through a few facilitation techniques to sort of tease priorities out of the participants from a variety of these collection staff, right? It's mostly the liaisons, but from others as well, just to make sure that their perspectives were really honored in this process and really visible in the outcomes. One of my favorite things we did was that we had little lightning talks on access, on interdisciplinary needs, on emerging methods and formats, right? So it wasn't just me talking at people or me telling people they needed to move around and form small groups, me telling people to put some more post-its up on the wall. It was everyone in the room talking to each other as peers, as experts, as people with expertise to bring to the table and bring to this process. We also, this was one of my favorite things, I know people thought it was a little bit goofy, but I gave everyone a name badge. And I had them write down the big idea, the one big idea they wanted to see present in some way in this document, the one viewpoint that they wanted represented. And a few of those were international students, graduate students, collective collections, course reserves, open pedagogy, and emerging formats. These were really big, important ideas, right? And it allowed me to get a better sense of what the priorities of the people in the room were. And it let everyone find that out at the same time in a way that was really natural, right? Despite being scaffolded, right? Because you can't just expect people to talk to each other, unfortunately. I don't know if you've realized this for yourself. You've really got to you've got to set a table and you've got to make people feel comfortable enough that they're going to talk to each other. And accomplishing that takes a lot of work, and that's what facilitation is for. We then broke our current document into parts in a process that I would say most resembled sentence diagramming. So for our process people, we built in a piece that really acknowledged these are the pieces of the document and what belongs there, what should stay. And we did this, this was like maybe the longest part of the process, right? Because breaking a document into pieces is not easy. And people have a different sense of what's the how or what's the subject, and you kind of have to fight it out. And this was also one of my favorite parts of this process was facilitating a debate, because we're very bad at being direct with each other, and we're very bad actually about emerging where we're in conflict and where we disagree, right? So we took that opportunity, and I was very proud of it. And then we made those terrariums. So I made everyone take a break. I made everyone eat lunch. And while this could have been, it's just people get so focused even the course of a day, right? So this was a 4-hour session. This was not a super long session, but people will get so focused in the course of a day that if you don't break it up and give people those social opportunities, there's so much opportunity for that energy to go nowhere. So much opportunity for the design of your day to actually collapse like a souffle, right? To just go wrong. So after lunch, what we did then was with this sort of, again, this basis in trust, this understanding of what all of our priorities are, we used a charrettes model to do really short sprints, 5 minutes in small groups where we each focused on one of these high-level themes and ideas that we had emerged ourselves, right? So again, very democratic, very participatory, and extremely holistic. And after that, what we did was in those 5 minutes, we got more and more specific. We did little short 30 and 40-second, actually, revisions. We moved around the room. Different groups got to look at what was going on. And at that point, we were able to come up with, I think it's like 6, you'll see on a slide coming up, 6 statements of principles that are really guiding principles. They weren't perfect at the time. We did hone them afterwards. But at that point, the day was over. Right? We had accomplished what we wanted to do. People presented out what they'd been working on, and we all just clapped, because again, there's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate that work that we should build in more frequently, but a retreat makes that easier, makes it more comfortable. So the trust that that participatory model built meant that when I went and fixed this up and got it on our website, no one was like, Lindsay, I feel left out of this process. Right? No one was like, Lindsay, you didn't include me in this piece. And it meant that when I said to them, the licensing process is complicated and I'm going to present this to you, but it's not going to be something that's a group project. They understood that too. So again, this is what came out of it. So it's still Drupal, you guys. Like, you can still only make it so pretty, but these are icons from the Noun project, which I cannot recommend highly enough. and we'll be revisiting this again. So it's 6 statements. We offer a variety of collaborative practices. We connect users to resources. We pursue open and equitable practices. We collect and preserve university outputs. We assess our collections, and we seek diverse voices, right? Really quick, really simple, but stating why we do what we do. And then this is another page that's sort of coming out of it that includes really practical pieces like information for publishers and vendors, like who are you supposed to contact, right? They can point when a vendor sends them an email to this and know that I've got their back. So just more stuff and cleanup. So the next steps for me and for us are that we're developing a best practices document for onboarding new librarians. We're developing a licensing rules doc to guide our negotiations. And I'm even hiring for a position right now that has a really strong documentation focus, because as a group, we decided that documentation was really crucial, right? And we really wanted to honor that by saying that someone's staff time should be dedicated to that role. Thanks, and I'm gonna hand it off to Annie.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Annie Rauh from Syracuse University Libraries. I'm the interim head of collections and research services there. And I'm going to talk about a project that we undertook at the libraries to define our licensing principles. So my colleague spoke a little bit about their collection development policies and what they're collecting. We were not so much focused on what we were collecting, but definitely on how we were collecting it. As probably many of you, most of our collections budget goes towards licensed resources, and so we were ready to put a lot of time and effort into making sure those particular practices were understood across all of the people involved and then well documented. So the project that we did. Our project had 4 goals when we went into it. So we wanted to develop a workflow for licenses. At my university, we don't sign licenses within the libraries. They get signed by the university comptroller. We had a lot of different ways that they were making their way there. We were never certain exactly who'd reviewed them, when, if we'd gotten everything we wanted out of it before they got to be signed. We also had a decision to move this process from administration to the collection development librarians. This was not a process that administration needed to be involved in. It was something that the librarians were well suited to do, and everybody was on board with sort of relieving that bottleneck of putting things up to administration and not having them go anywhere because of other things getting in their way. We also wanted to establish a shared set of principles to guide license review. So like other libraries, we are very collaborative and sometimes a little bit to our detriment. We go out and ask for everybody's opinion on particular things that they might be involved in. And it's either due to lack of trust or just trying to be super, super collaborative that we then have to get 19 people looking at the same document. We wanted to establish that we were all looking for the same stuff in license documents, so whether I was reviewing the license, somebody else was reviewing the license, we were all looking for the same things in a particular license, and we didn't have to go consult every single time with every other person in the library. And we wanted to explicitly include accessibility and authors' rights in our licenses and language around those. So like every good library project, we also made up a team. You'll notice here that this team was focused on collections and acquisitions librarians. We don't have the liaison librarians in this because we were really focusing on the how, the mechanics of licensing, not the what. So that was an explicit decision around the team makeup. And we've also included our accessibility and inclusion librarian as well as our open publishing librarian, because we wanted to make sure that we had them in the room from the beginning for those pieces of the license documents. All right, that was everybody there. In June 2018, we charged a team. This is how all projects get started at my library. And we had a kickoff meeting. And very, very quickly, we were able to have our principles document completed. From June to August was a very collaborative time period. It's also when we don't have very many classes going on, so we were able to accomplish these bigger projects. The team met bi-weekly, and everyone had a writing assignment every 2 weeks. So we would get your assignment, you'd have 10 days to write, you'd have 4 days to review, and then we'd meet again. Like Kelly shared, that if one person had drafted this and just asked for feedback, this was not going to work. We were not going to be able to build the trust that we needed to get everybody's ideas into the document, so we didn't have to get everybody's input every time after the fact. By August, the principles document was completed, and then we also set off our secondary part of the project, which was to actually draw out some of the workflows of how licenses move through our university. So in November 2018, the document and an attached report were submitted to our management team, and in January 2019, we really began these new workflows. So the products that we established through this project. The first thing that we created was Syracuse University Library's licensing principles document. This is available in our institutional repository. I believe I have the URL on the next slide. And it is a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license, so anybody is welcome to share it, adopt it, and as long as you credit it and use the same license yourself. This document includes 22 key license clauses that we prefer to see in each one of our license agreements, and information about why. I will read to you the sort of 5 key points that we highlighted in the introduction to our document, because these were really our guiding principles for what goes on in the rest of the document. So the libraries are committed to providing all Syracuse University's students, faculty, and staff of all abilities and disabilities equitable access to the library's resources, and expect agreements to outline how their products comply with Section 508 guidelines and Syracuse University accessibility policy. That is one of our top priorities at Syracuse University, so it was going to be in our top, in our list of principles. The libraries strive to protect user privacy and confidentiality and expect agreements to comply with this value of librarianship. We were not going to be shy about we want the values of librarianship in our documents. The library supports the rights of Syracuse University authors and creators and pursue agreements that protect those rights and that comply with mandates requiring access to research. The libraries value the opportunity to work with our consortial partners and to the benefit of the larger library community and prefer agreements derived from commonly accepted model licenses. And the library seeks agreements on behalf of Syracuse University and is obligated to all university-wide policies. So as I said, we don't actually license for the library, we license on behalf of the university, and we wanted that to be clear to everybody who read our document from the beginning. So we went into this with our document audience intended to be for the collections librarians who would be reviewing the documentation, but also for our vendors to know what to expect and what they would expect, what we would be expecting them to include in licensed documentation. So as Lindsay showed, her university has an example of how you're going to work with us. We also have an example on our website of how you're going to work with us, and you can find this document from there too. So the document's set up, set up like this, where we have a section of why and a section of what. So the interlibrary loan being the example, we're committed to providing access through resource sharing networks. We want to see interlibrary loan in our licenses. We also have example language if an agreement does not include language that we can copy and paste and put in. The why was really important, just so we were all on the same page of what it is we were looking for, but also as we read agreements, we're not going to rewrite every single agreement that comes our way, and so we wanted the why to be able to read things that were presented to us and determine if they were close enough in line with what we were seeking, to not have to change that. We have a section on green open access and authors' own works, as well as accessibility. And those are just some of the 22 examples that you'll find through our document. So then the second part of the project was to actually map how these licenses move through our university. You're going to see a lot of acronyms here because these are different roles we have in our library, but because we were no longer going to be going out and asking every single person who might want some input in there what they thought of different parts of a license, we wanted it to be very clear to everybody in the library how we moved these things through the library, outside of the library to the comptroller, back to the library, and who was responsible for each step along the way. So there was never any question about who should be doing each part of the process. So if we have actually 7 different workflows for how licenses may flow through our university based on if it's a new resource from a new vendor, a vendor decided that it was time to update a license, we decided that the license was too old and it was time to renegotiate, or if it was a consortial partner or things like that. And all of them map what happens to go through the library, out, back, and then back to the vendor. And if we decide not to go forward with something and either we chose not to get it signed or university comptroller, university council refused to sign it, we have a process for keeping track of the why for all of those, so we know what to look for in future processes, or in future licenses, sorry. All right, so the outcomes and the next steps. So as far as our agreement outcomes, everyone reviewing the documents has a pretty clear understanding of the language we seek. So we have people who were not previously reviewing licenses, that's now a part of their role, and we feel pretty confident that we're doing it to the best of our ability. We've also been really successful including accessibility language in almost all of our agreements that were signed in 2019, which was one of our primary goals for doing this project. As far as workflow outcomes, we have fewer delays. We know where things are in the process, and so we know who's supposed to be doing them and where they get stuck. We have a more thorough review of each document because we have a start to each one of those processes that we need to look for. And we've updated some agreements to reflect current needs and desired languages. Sometimes it was just easy to let some old things ride because we didn't have to do it every year. And this way we are starting to tackle some of those out-of-date agreements that we would like to see changes to. There is always further documentation to be made as we've continued to discuss. One thing that we've thought would be helpful as we're going through it is to have more of a checklist that would align with the principles document. 22 principles is a lot of things to look for, and not every single one of them is applicable to every single license. But being able to kind of just have a quick checklist to go through is something we feel like would be helpful. And we also need to include on that checklist for things to look for that are not actually principles, but just have to be in a license, like the university's address is correct, that it's Syracuse University instead of Syracuse University Libraries, or the libraries at Syracuse University, just those things that we will get licenses returned from University Council without them being correct. We just want to have a place to make sure they're all there. One of the challenges that we see, especially with this kind of documentation where we are trying to keep current language is that the desired language needs constant refinement. And we are okay with that because having this sort of central spot to look for it has been beneficial to us that we know, so beneficial to us that we know we're going to have to keep putting this work in. So this is not exactly one of those documents that we're going to entirely leave alone. The language of the what might change, but the why is not. And so this is just an example. We've adopted our accessibility language from the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Our university's accessibility policy has actually gone farther than the one that they have on their website right now. And so we just have to continually kind of update those sorts of things. And that is it. So I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Yep, we have a couple minutes for questions, and we want to thank you and encourage you to also be working on your documentation. So please do use the mic if you have a question.
I'm Leah Hamrick, e-resources librarian at Texas Christian University, and we're in the process of rewriting our collection development policy as well. I'm on a committee for that. I'm new to the institution, so I don't have a lot of historical knowledge. One of the things that we struggle with is keeping the other members of the committee from turning it into a procedures manual. It's not a procedures manual, it's a policy document. Do you have any suggestions to help with that?
It's crucial to define different documents. And I know that this can sound sort of overwhelming. Like, I just want to have a collection policy and I just want it to have everything, and it is not actually something that's going to set up you or your team for success. So again, if you can decide, these are going to be our guiding principles, this is going to be our licensing document, right? Like, licensing, you can get into those nuts and bolts. You can create that checklist document, right? But you've got to parse for the people that are participating in the process what they're working on at any given time. And I would actually recommend looking into project management methodology around it a little bit, right? So that you can structure, this is our outcome. I really liked what Annie talked about, where there was the writing process, right, with the set time frames. The same thing was true in the very short form of my day with the charrettes. So this is as much time as you get to pay attention to this for this one thing too, is going to stop you from getting stymied in the process.
Robert Heaton, Utah State University. I'm curious, it sounds like there's a range of authority from which you approach the process, just based on where you were. If you have an idea for moving forward with the document, but you don't have the authority to get it done or to say this is what the policy is going to be, do you have recommendations for navigating that water?
Yes, because that's my position too. I have no authority and no power at all. Ask questions. Ask well-formed, well-thought-out questions in a non-accusatory way. That's, like I said, I think those critical thinking exercises or whatever framework that you can find and kind of build around, just to ask, what makes you say that? What are you thinking? What assumptions are you making to conclude that this is something that we should value or we should not value? So ask questions, right? We're all librarians. Most of us are librarians here. We're very curious. So turn that curiosity within for our own values and practices. That's what I would recommend.
Is this one working too? I'm also going to say that when our document was written, I was actually not in position of leadership, but I was the leader on this particular document. And you actually have a really good opportunity to take more of a leadership role. Like, documentation takes time. I don't have that kind of time in my current position. And so if you have the ideas and you have, have asked questions about why it could change, it's also a sort of a great opportunity to show leadership from a non-formal leadership role.
So my organization also has a strong imperative toward collaboration that can sometimes help us and can sometimes hinder us. So some questions, since you guys talked about a variety of ways to collaborate, some questions about how to balance the sort of institutional desire for wide representation with having the right people in the room, I guess.
So the way I designed my day, right, was that it was only going to be one day. It was going to be the representative day, right? And from there, because it built the understanding, the opportunity to share experiences and perspectives was really baked into that, it meant that when I was saying document delivery is going to work on a draft document that has to do with their processes, everyone was like, cool, I don't need to fully understand every aspect of how Iliad works, right? Like, there's, I think that when folks have a stronger understanding of the work that's occurring in different places, you get clarity there. But scope is the best recommendation I have for you, Nora. Like, 1 day or 2 days max, that's the participatory time. And as long as you're really clear to you on that setup, people don't feel betrayed at the end when you're saying, that was it. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you coming out.